Good evening. Roll call, please.
Bruce Miller,
Here.
Kirk Martin, Craig Arcuri,
Here.
Chris Colbert,
Here.
William Gilbert,
Here.
Patricia Griffin,
Here.
Karen Kahn.
Here.
All right. And I wanted to welcome our newest commissioner, Craig Arcuri.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. Lots to look forward to.
Thank you very much.
All right. Changes to the agenda.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do have a change to the agenda, and I'd like to do it right now, if I could.
Certainly.
Former Commissioner Clark, could you please stand? We'd like to thank you. Not just for your recent stints on Airport Commission, but you really, over my tenure here for the last 29 years, you've served on Airport Commission quite a few times and really contributed to airport and the aviation community, and it's very much appreciated, and I appreciate it very much. We'd like to present you. Wonderful. This is his,
54 Buick.
yes, that he brought to the, when we christened kind of the historic terminal. Parked right out front and looked very historic. So thank you very much for your service, and hopefully we'll see you around and you won't just disappear completely.
Not going to fall off the earth.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. This is an antique and an old car beside it.
And the new terminal
Yeah,
that you
and the new
that
terminal.
you participated in. So
Thank you.
thank you. If you'd like to say anything, go right ahead.
Just a few things. This has been a very gratifying experience, I think is the way to put it. I was going to say fun, and then I went, nah. It had its moments. It's really been a wonderful time, and I have to thank you and Hazel and all of the airport staff. Made it very easy to do. And I have a question, you get the answer. It's very wonderful that way. And just the involvement with the city was really fun. I mean, where else do you get to go to a meeting and get a tour of the wastewater treatment plant? And I'm kind of serious about that. You learned a lot about what was going on outside of the airport itself. I've been here a little while. Thank you. This is
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been a real honor having you on the commission.
Mr. Chair, can I just mention one thing?
Sure.
Commissioner Gilbert and I were speaking about before the meeting. We recently installed a hearing loop in the room to assist those people who have difficulty hearing to hear better, and Commissioner Gilbert can speak to it better than I can. So I hope it's an improvement for meeting in this room, and those who need assistance but don't have the hearing devices that they need, we do have the devices that they can borrow.
It is very good. I hear well. You still have to talk into the mic. There's one problem with most people. You talk this way, you talk that way, but not into the mic. But it is a good system because you're talking directly into my ear. You whisper in my ear and I'll follow you anywhere. Well, thank you for doing it. You'll find it. I hope others will find it proven. If they don't have the T-coil, as you said, there are the other devices that we have now that will supplement that. They're easy to use. But thank you.
And we're hoping to install hearing loops in various places in the terminal where it's feasible to do that. It's in our capital program.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So,
All right. Great news. Thank you. Public comment. Any member of the public may address the commission on any subject within its jurisdiction. Time limit is 15 minutes. Do we have any speaker slips?
no speaker slips, Mr. Chair.
Nobody leaping to the floor. Okay, thank you. Notices on Thursday, July 11th at 5 p.m. The airport secretary duly posted this agenda at the bulletin board at Airport Administration. And the minutes, we have a recommendation to waive the reading and approve the minutes of the meeting Wednesday, June 19th.
I so move. Second?
All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. Thank you. Consent calendar. Any changes to the consent calendar? It is composed of a lease agreement with MSV Transport to lease agreement Santa Barbara Helicopters and the June property management report. Motion?
Motion for approval, please. Second?
All in favor of approving the consent calendar?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent calendar approved as presented. Liaison reports. We have our City of Santa Barbara liaison, Councilmember Randy Rouse. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Well, what's your city council been up to lately? We've been trying to wrestle the average unit density ordinance to the ground, which is an implementation part of Plan Santa Barbara, so it should be only slightly less understandable than the national healthcare system when we get done with it. We're big on acronyms and very arcane rules and regulations, so it'll be kind of fun. In other news, last night I got to attend the Goleta City Council meeting, and I think this relates to this group, even though it's not within the jurisdiction, talking about the preservation of the Goleta Beach Park, which I thought was a very lively discussion, very impassioned discussion, and very proud to say that I was proud to be associated with my colleagues to the west of us in Goleta when it came to doing that. One of the proposals, of course, is to have a snowy plover refuge right at the terminus of 15L down there, which is always a great place to have wildlife, as I understand. But so, in any case, it's very good to have everybody engaged, and there's a regional cooperation when it comes to something as important as the preservation of this park and facility for everybody. Happy to answer any questions. Didn't think you'd have any. Great. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And from the City of Goleta, Mayor Pro Tem Michael Bennett. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. I have one important thing to report this evening. Beginning at about 7 o'clock tonight, and I'm not sure what they're going to start with, Hollister Avenue is going to be resurfaced. It's going to take about 3 weeks, but the contract runs through August the 20th. It will start in the evenings from Sunday evening through Thursday evening. So it's just something to think about when you leave here. You probably don't want to head down Hollister Avenue. Think of another location to go to in the evening. We're doing it in the evening, as you might gather, because during the daytime it would be almost impossible doing the type of rework. We're grinding the asphalt down and repaving things I think that the airport's familiar with doing out here on runways and what have you. And so Hollister Avenue, we've had a slurry that was done in '06, and prior to that the asphalt's been in place for quite some time, so it really needs this major attention. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and anyone that's watches this particular commission meeting, just as a part of the outreach that we're doing with the business community and our local residents, and letting them know that this process is going forward, and it's going to be somewhat impacting to different individuals, but it's one of those necessary public works projects in order at the end product is going to be superior to what we find ourselves today. So I thought you might be interested in that. And I think that Councilmember Rouse explained last night's meeting, which was interesting. We had a packed hearing room, as you might guess, and a lot of passionate feelings. And I can say that it was very consistent in to save the beach park. So that's the direction that the City Council has given to staff and to our letter that we will be writing to the county to try to make that happen and see how successful we'll be. So any questions? And I'll be happy to. Yes, ma'am.
The length of Hollister starting from where to where?
This will be from Fairview all the way to about Kinman. Kinman is the first block west of Kellogg.
Okay, so
So it'd be just right up there where the 76 gas station is. That's my understanding. They may go further to Kellogg, but I believe the cutoff right now is scheduled for Kinman.
okay, but basically they're running east, Fairview and east.
Correct. So it's a pretty extensive project.
Thank you.
Okay.
And the dates on that again were?
I beg your pardon?
The dates on that again?
This evening, and I'm not sure what they're doing this evening. I'm not sure if they're doing hard work or they're doing some of the preliminary work that's necessary to get things off the dime. So I can't really tell you, although you may be confronted with actual construction going on, I just don't know. But it'll run for 3 weeks for hard construction, but the contract is set up to run through the 20th of August.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you.
All right. Well, I guess that means airport staff is going to have to leave work early on evenings so they don't get stuck in that,
I
right?
go home on Los Carneros. I'm waiting until they replace that bridge. That'll be
right.
interesting.
Okay, item number 7, subcommittee assignments. We have a number of openings. I refer you all to the roster you should have in front of you for those. Before we go through that, let me ask if there is anybody wishing to withdraw from a subcommittee?
Get on
A withdrawal? Are you withdrawing? Does anybody wish to withdraw from anything? Okay, well, I will go through these and indicate the members and openings. If anybody would like to volunteer, we have the Air Service, with currently Gilbert and Griffin, and an opening.
I'll volunteer.
All right, we have Con on Air Service. Thank you. Budget, this is a riveting committee. We have it is, really, it is. Myself, Commissioner Colbert, and one opening. So,
Well, I think I'll jump at that.
all right, you won't be disappointed.
It's next to noise abatement, I think.
Hey,
In
wait a
popularity.
minute.
It is, in all honesty, it's really, it is very interesting and it is very important. So I really appreciate Commissioner Arcuri stepping up for that. General Aviation, myself, Con, and one opening.
Well, I might be biting off more than I can chew, but given that I just landed at 1.5 right about 10 minutes ago, I think I probably would be a
think
good
that's
candidate for that.
an excellent idea. Okay.
Loaded with GA folks. It's good.
All right. Ground Transportation, myself, Commissioner Martin, and one opening. All right, Commissioner Gilbert, thank you. Lease Review, Griffin, Colbert, Miller, with no withdrawals, and there is no opening. Master Plan Committee, Con, Martin, Miller. Changes? Nope. And here is the ever-in-demand noise abatement. We have Commissioner Gilbert and one opening. It meets fairly infrequently. Who's in here?
It's usually noisy when it happens.
We could appoint somebody, I suppose.
Or do we have to have two?
I'm not sure that we have to have two.
Didn't
We
the
haven't
guy
had
with-
two for a while.
Yeah, you don't have to have two, but
The guy with the auto
I
dialer?
met all this year. In fact, our chief noise guy is retired, I believe. I don't know who's
yeah, I think they're down to meeting quarterly now. The noise situation has been kind of
Quiet.
fairly quiet. I wouldn't say quiet, but calm.
Less noisy.
But if it flares up, we can always meet more often.
Just convene a special appointment. All right.
I think ordinances we can take off since we went through those.
Okay, we have no ordinance issues then. The ground transportation is being dealt with by ground transportation, as I recall, right?
Well, and you've
yeah,
already
the other-
reviewed the
Right.
ordinance.
Very good. And Public Relations, Griffin, Con, Martin. And with that is item...
Mr. Chair, could I
Yes.
add, I would like to have a representative from Commission join the Art Committee whenever we're, they don't meet regularly, but probably, 2 or 3 times a year maybe. And what they do is make recommendations to the City Arts Advisory Committee and the Visual Arts and Public Places
I
Committee.
pass.
Thank you.
Sorry, I apologize. I couldn't resist that.
We have-
No, I think that was good.
Well, we have a volunteer.
Oh, Ms. Griffin, thank you.
Is there a regular meeting time for that?
No, I'll probably be trying to set up a meeting in August, but like I said, we'll probably only meet a few times a year.
All right. Thank you all for your eagerness to volunteer there. And item number 8, the Airport Master Plan Status Update Report.
Well, it's been a while since you've had an update, and the process is moving along. We just finished the alternatives section, and the committee has finished their work, so I'll introduce our consultant. Now I'm going to have Jim Harris. I always want to go Jim Kaufman, no, from Kaufman Associates, our consultant, and he will make a presentation and bring you up to date, and we'll be able to hopefully answer any questions you have. Jim.
Thank you, Karen. Chairman Miller, members of the Commission, thank you again for allowing me to be here this evening to give you an update on the master planning process. As you mentioned earlier, I believe 3 of the members of the Commission serve on the Master Plan Committee, Advisory Committee, so many of you have heard this presentation, so I will make sure that we cover the items that we talked about primarily at throughout the process, but certainly at the last committee meeting, which is where we then presented what were considered to be the preliminary recommendations of the plan. So we'll talk about that here in just a moment. I guess first of all, I just wanted to take a moment and just go back and refresh your memories as far as the master plan process. Again, the master planning document is intended to be a 20-year planning document for the airport. When completed, it will ultimately replace the current facilities plan document for the airport, which again was a planning horizon-oriented document. In this particular case, we're looking out 20 years. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but there are a number of steps that need to be followed through a master plan process. Of course, this particular planning effort was funded primarily by the FAA with local assistance on the part of the city. So we're following steps prescribed by the FAA to meet the requirements of the planning process. There are a number of items that you go through this process, and you wonder, well, at the end of the day, who approves the final document? And it is the city's responsibility to approve the final document. It is a community's document. The FAA actually does not approve your master plan. They approve 2 key pieces in the master plan. One is the forecast, and the other is the airport layout plan. Those are the 2 key pieces that FAA actually does take a review and approval process to heart and does sign off on those documents. The planning process, essentially, as you can see, there's some dates in there. There's all the steps we followed, which for the most part reflect the chapters of the report, so you can kind of look at the boxes there, and they do reflect the various chapters. And then you'll see to the right the circles are the Master Plan Advisory Committee meetings. There have been 6 of those throughout this process. The first one dating back to December of 2011. So we've been working on this process now for about 18 months. And we've also incorporated a very robust public outreach program through the form of not only the committee participation, which the committee is made up of about 25 individuals, not only airport staff and airport commission, but the agencies, the FAA, Caltrans, and then a variety of different other stakeholders, including airport users, airport tenants, other local agencies, and interested individuals who were willing to participate in this particular planning effort, which I must say has been very helpful to get the input that we have from everyone. They've been very, very helpful. But we've also had 4 public information workshops, advertised workshops, so that the public could attend and participate in the planning process, and those have been well attended with lots of good questions and lots of good input. I think what I'd like to point out, instead of mentioning every particular item again for you, is that we have been through this process. Karen mentioned going through the alternatives. We even took a step back and held 2 committee meetings to discuss alternatives, because there were so many different ideas and thoughts discussed. It was really important to have that opportunity to review revised alternatives and talk about that. We are at this final stage where we have, as I mentioned, we've prepared some concepts, final recommended concepts, as well as a financial plan reflecting what the capital costs would be. We've begun the process of developing airport layout plans, and of course we've done some environmental overview from the NEPA process standpoint. which, again, as I mentioned, we did present to the committee back on June 26th, just last month. And now, from this point forward, we'll begin the process of CEQA documentation for environmental documentation. And then, of course, ultimately, all of the documentation will move forward for final approval and adoption through not only coming through the Airport Commission, but certainly to the City Council. So, again, I did want to highlight the fact that the public outreach has been pretty extensive here. We've made every effort. The airport staff has worked diligently to make sure that anytime anyone was looking for information or wanted questions answered, they had an opportunity to get involved, be it through serving on the advisory committee, again listing all the dates there, the workshops, but we also had a project website that was pretty heavily used. We had quite a few hits on the website, people looking up information about the master plan, but also posting comments and questions. So we were real pleased with how well that project website was used. It had all the information that the committee was reviewing, as well as it was all downloadable, so the community had access to the material really 24/7. We went through a lot of the workshops. We did quite a bit of, I say we, meaning the project team and the airport staff did a lot of advertising through newspaper ads, press releases, and again, as I said, the attendance was very good, very positive discussions, and I think everyone felt like they had an opportunity to be heard. I'm going to step back just a little bit. I know this is part of the information you've seen. Some of you have not, but just a little background on the airport. The existing airport property is about 940 acres, just under 1,000 acres of property. Of course, you have the three runways, the primary runway, the instrument runway, being runway 725 operating in an east-west configuration, and then, of course, the two crosswind runways, the two smaller runways operating in a generally north-south configuration. One of the runways does have a displaced threshold here on the north end for obstruction clearance. Let's see. There we go. We put this up here just to illustrate the fact that the airport has pretty significant instrument approach capabilities, and particularly to runway 725. We just wanted to make sure that as we went through this master planning process, that was a topic of discussion, is do we have the sufficient amount of instrument capabilities at the airport? And I think we're pretty satisfied that the airport's in good shape on instrument capabilities, although with changes in airspace technology, next-gen, and GPS, the airport will constantly be going through improvements to their instrument capabilities. One of the first steps, as I mentioned, even though we're focusing in on facility requirements, they all begin with what is the demand. The one thing I failed to mention was that the master plan is considered a demand-based document. And what I mean by that is, while we're projecting out over a 20-year period, obviously we're taking the best guess as what we think the activity will be. But when it comes down to actually building improvements or making improvements, not only does the airport staff want to make sure that every capital project is justified, so does FAA, particularly when they fund a large share of that. So when we say demand-based, we want to make sure that you're only making improvements when the demand exists for those improvements. Number one, expenditure of funds, and number two, the revenue support that will come from that or will be needed to support maintenance costs in the future. So our forecasting were done in a way that we looked at a variety of different forecasts. There's some prescribed methodologies that FAA has that we have to follow, and we did that. We settled on these particular forecasts. Our base year was actually the first or the most complete year at the time we started the study was 2011. And you can see there the passenger enplanements or boardings were about 365,000, cargo at about 2,000 tons, base general aviation aircraft 178, and then total operations at the airport just over 100,000, about 108,000. Now, when we went through the forecasting, we refer here to the short term, intermediate, and long term. The short term is generally 5 years, intermediate 10, and then the long term, the 20-year horizon. So you can see the forecast, what they produce in terms of employments growing to about 657,000 employments, passenger employments. GA aircraft growing to about 236, and operations growing to about 133,000. These forecasts were, after going through review by the committee, being reviewed internally here at the airport, they were finally submitted to the FAA. The FAA has reviewed and approved these forecasts, which is an important step because they want to make sure that all your planning is based on forecasts that have been approved by the FAA and are considered reasonable by the FAA. They don't want your forecast to be overly optimistic or overly pessimistic either. So they're looking at forecasts which they consider reasonable and match up with the forecasting they do on a national basis. So the good news is that step has been accomplished and approved by the FAA. One of the things we looked at was capacity. We have these numbers that we've looked at over time, and what does that mean, particularly from an airfield perspective? Can the airfield itself, the runway taxiway system, accommodate the number of operations that take place at the airport? And you can see the operations numbers, takeoff and landings that I just referred to, be in this line here, starting at the base year, growing out 20 years. And then you can see the runway capacity, what we refer to as the annual service volume of the runway. And over time, the runway service volume does diminish somewhat. That's really a function of the variety of different aircraft that operate at the airport. Some of the higher performance aircraft mixing in with the slower single-engine piston aircraft. So as operations tend to grow, you'll find your capacity drops just because of the mix of the types of aircraft. Not unusual at all. We see that all the time. Most importantly, though, that we found that in 2011, the airfield itself was operating at about 48% of capacity. So that's good. You're in good shape. And even over the long term, over the next 20 years, with the increase in operations, the different types of aircraft, increase in employments, passenger activity, you're still going to be at 65% of capacity. So you have more than adequate capacity in the runway system, which essentially means we don't have to look at any ways to increase capacity to handle the demand that's projected over the next 20 years. Now, one of the most critical pieces when you're doing the planning is trying to figure out what is your design aircraft or your critical aircraft. That's real important because the FAA has sets of prescribed design standards that we have to meet. And what I mean by that is they have runway taxiway separation distances, they have runway taxiway widths, they have runway safety area dimensions. They have a variety of dimensions, and they're all different depending upon the type of critical aircraft you have. Obviously, when you have smaller aircraft, some of the dimensional criteria is less. When you have larger aircraft, that criteria and separation and safety areas gets much larger. What we refer to as airport reference code is a real important concept. And very quickly, the A and B, C, D nomenclature refers to the approach speeds of the aircraft. The higher that goes up through D, C and D being the higher performance, mainly your turbine aircraft, your jet aircraft. The A and B aircraft are going to be your piston or propeller-driven aircraft, but for the most part. But again, the higher the approach speeds on the aircraft, the higher the alpha component. The other one, the Roman numeral 1 through 3, refers to the wingspan of the aircraft. So again, similarly, the larger the wingspan, the more demanding the design standards. So again, we just tried to categorize, give sample aircraft. And of course, the one that's shaded is the one that you don't really have a significant number of aircraft operating at the airport in that category or expected to operate. When we talk about critical aircraft, we're talking about an FAA's concern by standard is when you have 500 or more annual itinerant operations by that type of aircraft. So what we found in more of the private, corporate, general aviation fleet, those aircraft tend to be the higher performance business jets that become the most demanding, which are the Gulfstream 5s, the Gulfstream 650. And then in the air carrier class, or the passenger aircraft, we're talking about the CRJ-900, the Boeing 737. Those are the ones that are the design aircraft from a passenger standpoint for the airport. So that gives us the design aircraft that we work with, and that's the ones we've used through the planning effort so far. As we met with the committee and went through all the various evaluations up to this point, one of the things we found or tried to identify is what are the major airfield considerations. And those became the mitigation of taxiway hotspots. There are some areas, taxiways, which can be a little confusing from an air traffic perspective or from a pilot perspective. There had been 4 of those particular taxiway configurations that had been identified by the FAA, and so we started to take a look at those. These became also some of our things that we were looking at as we addressed each alternative that we looked at for the airports, different functional areas. Extending taxiway H, taxiway hotel to the runway 7 threshold was a major item. FAA had also identified that as a significant safety project because of increased operations on the north side of 725 and minimizing runway crossings. That was important. Taxiway exit locations, again, that's just mainly looking at airfield efficiency and seeing what we can do to help in that regard. The visual approach aid for runway 15 right, 33 left, we wanted to see if we could find something along the lines of a PAPI type of a system that would provide that. And then the protection of the runway protection zones, the property that's not on airport but are under the runway protection zones, we wanted to identify those and start to focus on making sure that the airport or the city has control of those areas. The general aviation considerations were the consolidation of GA activities or facilities on the north side of the field, obviously because of the need for the general aviation area south of the terminal for future terminal development and parking development, aircraft storage and hangar needs, public general aviation parking, fuel storage needs, helicopter parking, full perimeter security fencing, and locations for new maintenance facilities. So these were items that were identified that these all became elements that we started to study through the alternatives process. From the terminal perspective, you're in a very nice position in having a new beautiful terminal that will serve you for a number of years before you really have to do anything to the terminal building. But there were parking facility needs, and particularly for long-term, and looking at the closure of the long-term lot north of Hollister to eliminate that inconvenience to the passengers and also eliminate the cost to the airport of operating that. The gate apron and overflow parking there, we needed to make sure that we had plenty of room for overnight parking and some diversion aircraft, make sure there's plenty of space. The lavatory disposal or dump station, it was located in an area that required an awful lot of vehicular traffic to take care of that. We wanted to locate near the terminal. Same thing with the trash compactor. And the facility expansion, we did see that over time we're going to need about, over the 20-year period, about another 9,700 square feet of terminal space, dependent upon the different functions, whether it's for in-planing passengers or deplaning passengers. So those became some of the parameters in our alternatives. And those of you that were on the committee know that we spent a lot of time. I think our alternatives meetings all went at least 3-4 hours going through them and discussing them and fine-tuning them and refining them. And so I won't take you through all of the iterations that we went through, but I think in the interest of time we'd just bring you to where we ended up as far as what we felt were consensus by the committee, input from the committee, and what we felt should be the final recommended plan. And this would be our preliminary recommendations to date. This is an overall development concept. It's taken everything. I'm going to break this down so you'll be able to see it a little clearer and talk about the airfield. In this particular case, you heard me mention earlier, taxiway hotel. I think that was very clear. That's a real important project. Excuse me. There are a couple hot spots in the taxiway areas that we talked about. We looked a lot at reconfiguring taxiways, eliminating pavement, and after getting lots of input from particularly air traffic in the tower, we came up with some different ideas to handle that, and I think we found some effective ways that help their efficiency in ground movement of aircraft and still eliminating some of these potential runway incursion areas and hotspot issues. The same is true here, where we had a real wide expanse of pavement. And the green area you see is essentially taking some of that pavement and marking it or coloring it in that type of a color to give more definitive lines for movement of the aircraft, so it helps avoid some of the runway incursion potential that could occur. We again mentioned this particular taxiway here adjacent to, that's Bravo, am I correct on that? That one, this particular section of the taxiway bends a little bit closer to the terminal than it, and we'd really, because we have some terminal constraints or constraints in the space between the terminal and the taxiway areas, we want to bring that taxiway out just a bit to provide a little more space for wingtip clearance and make sure that we don't have any issues down the road. And there are, you'll see along some of the taxiways and along the crosswind runways, some shoulder work that is recommended for future safety, ensuring that FOD doesn't get onto the taxiways and runways, and maintenance issues. Good safety projects. And I did mention the runway protection zones. There's a little parcel of land up here that would be good to look at a navigation easement to make sure that things don't happen there that would cause any potential harm to aircraft arrivals or restrict aircraft arrival departures on that runway. And the same is true here. This is just a small little corner for the runway protection zone, but FAA is basically looking very seriously at all airports trying to control all their runway protection zones. And that's somewhat of an initiative that FAA has right now. We also have some perimeter fencing issues here that need to be improved, so we've identified those. In the terminal area, again, I mentioned, of course, the new terminal in this location. The areas that we show for expansion are really consistent with the way the terminal was laid out initially, so it could expand in a couple areas. So this particular expansion here to the north, it'd be more for your enplaning passenger activities, the ticketing and some gate locations, whereas the southerly expansion would be geared more toward more baggage claim, more rental car facilities, more of the deplaning passenger functions. We show the ramp areas as expanded, or at least ensure that we have plenty of ramp area to handle the aircraft operating at the terminal as well as overnight aircraft. And as I mentioned, the parking being a significant issue, we have allowed for this area where the FBO currently resides, once they are relocated to the north side of the field, that this area would be used for ground-based parking similar to the way it is up in this area right now. But we do have a provision for a potential parking structure should parking needs expand well beyond the 20-year time frame, the opportunity to place a parking structure where it would not conflict with the terminal or views that are provided through the terminal facility today. We also have an extension of the loop road here to also open up more short-term parking. And we mentioned earlier the laboratory dump station. And I think, there's just a couple areas here. There are some small taxiway improvements here consistent with FAA's new design guidelines, where we try to minimize direct movement of aircraft from a ramp area like occurs today, from a ramp area directly to a runway. FAA wants those staggered somewhat to minimize the potential for an incursion into a runway environment. Taxiway K, Taxiway Kilo, is one that has a bit of a problem too with aircraft in this just general area with the terminal and aircraft exiting. We have talked with the tower, and we've got a couple ideas of where we might still be able to leave that and find another way to take care of that situation without actually removing the pavement. So we're still exploring that one. The north side development, this obviously was kind of the bigger focus of a lot of the alternatives, and we had lots of great discussion. The FBOs were very helpful in their wants and desires. At the end of the day, in trying to identify how they develop in the future, it was really decided that the best thing to do, since they have their own thoughts and ideas of what they want to do in the future, is to give them basically a clean sheet to work with. So we've identified 2 FBO areas, both of them approximately 23 acres, which they can take, and as you meet with or receive proposals from the FBOs, they will come up with their own ideas and thoughts and proposals to develop their facilities in those 2 areas. That was after exploring a number of different opportunities for them and what they really felt this was going to work best for them. One thing that we found interesting that has been somewhat of a transition, most FBOs in the past used to like to have proximity to the runway and visibility from the runway. In their philosophy, they'd much rather see, a little bit better visibility from Hollister, from the FBO building and facility itself. But this would give them a lot of ramp area and also hangar development area in these 2. The current building we're in, the airport admin building, would be removed in this case, and airport offices put over in the Ampersand building. This particular spot then would be left for a future newly developed restaurant and possibly a small conference center, something where community meetings could be held as well. So we've kind of left that area open for that development. And then, of course, there's some redevelopment of some T-hangars in this particular location as well. Over here, we focused on really more the private general aviation community and providing facilities where they can do certain things, including, of course, certainly adding some more, some more T-hangar development in this area, and opportunities for smaller businesses and parcels to establish smaller businesses, but also to establish a self-serve maintenance type facility and wash rack facility in this area. And also incorporating more transient parking in this area that would be managed more by the airport staff than by the FBOs. So we've tried to incorporate a lot of ideas that came out of the general aviation community to these different alternatives, and they're still going through some small refinements in areas as well. The airport's maintenance facility here, which is in the floodway. The yellow areas you see on both sides are the floodways, and because this is subject to flooding, this has been selected as a potential new area for airport maintenance. Gives a lot more proximity to the airfield, ease of access, and a little bit more of a weather-friendly environment in the future. One thing I didn't mention earlier, there was a lot of discussion on incorporating multimodal aspects into the airport, certainly bike paths and things of that nature, and it's been reflected in the plan that the airport is going to work with the different agencies to incorporate those into the ultimate master plan. We didn't take or get down to the fine point of how those would all be laid out, because each area on the airport is going to be slightly different and how that would work. But we did acknowledge that, and certainly that was an important component to several of the people on the planning committee. As I mentioned, everything has been laid out in a fashion that will take over 20 years to go through, as long as the demand materializes. But we've staged it or showed it in a phasing. And so for the short-term projects, which again are more the 5-year projects, you can see those highlighted in yellow, and if you've looked through any of the material, you'll find that most everything in the 5-year time frame revolves more around airfield improvements and safety enhancement type of improvements. On some of the other areas, more the land side, I think things are in pretty good shape for the next few years, with the exception, of course, moving toward relocation of Atlantic up to the north side, and then starting to reconfigure the area for the FBOs. But again, I think the way we've laid things out, we've left that clean slate for them to look at and come up with a concept and bring each concept back to the Airport Commission and to the airport and to the city. The second stage, or the intermediate, again, the 6 through 10 time frame. Again, now you see the focus on building the parking lot down in this area, Some minor improvements, the maintenance area would be a major improvement, but then there's building some T hangars, building some of the facilities over here. So they're more, now in this case, they're more landside. They're geared more toward activity and demand for those particular facilities. And then, of course, in the long term, everything is really based on demand. We looked at, again, some more airfield improvements that could be staged over time, and particularly things that weren't absolutely safety critical, but some of the shoulder areas, getting this taxiway moved out, it wasn't an immediate need, but something that should be done. And then, of course, building out more of the general aviation facilities in that quadrant of the airport. I didn't, if you've seen any of the documents in the report, you'll see that we've gone through and itemized every particular project and given a cost to it, so there's a whole couple pages of projects in there, and I didn't want to take you through that, but give you really the quick thumbnail sketch of the costs for all the projects that have been identified, and you can see we've broken that out in the short term, about $28 million of total cost, of which $26 million is FAA or AIP eligible. And again, just want to stress that it's eligible. There's by saying that, it doesn't mean anything's guaranteed, because there are discretionary monies in here that doesn't always, will be highly dependent upon competition with other airports, available funding, et cetera, et cetera. But you do receive certain levels of entitlement funds, which would be dedicated toward this. So if you look through the financial section of the master plan, you'll see where we've broken all of that out to give a general sense of where the funding would come from, but over time a majority of it would come from FAA. In the intermediate time frame, we show about $21 million of improvements, and in the long term about $30 million. So we have about an $81 million capital plan for the next 20 years, of which over $60 million is eligible for the FAA funding. But most importantly, then you have to look at the local share, the local cost. And just as you do every year when you look at your capital plans, you look at your financing, this will be looked at every single year as you pursue projects and see if the demand still exists, if the financial capabilities are there, but at least this gives you more or less the blueprint of where you need to head to meet the demands. Now finally, at the very beginning of this process, working with the committee was a real help, as I mentioned, and one of the things that they came up with, which we thought was an excellent idea, was why not establish some guiding principles, which a number of commissions and city groups have, and so these particular principles, which I think are consistent with the commission's principles, were applied to the master plan. And so at the beginning, we established those principles, and then here at the end, we wanted to see how well we did. So the first of all was safety and security, providing safe and secure facilities and operating environment for aviators and the general public. Well, obviously, as we mentioned, everything was geared towards safety, looking at mitigating runway incursion hotspots, meeting all the FAA design standards, looking at taxiway hotel for safety reasons. All of the airfield improvements we talked about were all safety related. And then the landside projects that enhance safety and security include the relocation of the maintenance yard so it's more directly accessible to the airfield, and the improvement of the perimeter fencing to the south. The other guiding principle, the economic vitality, to continue to serve as a vital economic contributor to the region while maintaining the airport's economic self-sufficiency. Again, we talked about that the master plan does provide for the maintenance and development of commercial service and GA operators that contribute to the local economy. And the aviation activity beyond the current levels is anticipated to grow, but the airport's economic impact will also support its economic self-sufficiency. So, in other words, I think what we're saying is the plan is established to support the users, support the development that occurs. If you don't, then there's going to be a negative economic impact to the community as well. Transportation diversity, providing modern quality facilities to serve a variety of aviation needs and services. I think just you'll see that what we've done is we've tried to maintain the highest level of design standards for the airport to serve the higher performance aircraft, but also making sure that we've provided areas and functional areas on the airport to serve the smaller general aviation community, or smaller aircraft in the general aviation community. Again, general aviation is a key component of this airport, And but it has a wide variety of users, from the higher-end corporate to the smaller private and sport and recreational flyers. So we wanted to make sure that all those were identified and addressed, and you can see, again, I think we've done that in the recommendations. And also accounting for ground transportation projects, whether it be vehicle, roadway, bike paths, sidewalk improvements. Community, being a good neighbor to the community. Again, I think you'll find that we worked with the community through the Master Planning Advisory Committee, working with the public workshops, making sure that the public had an opportunity to get engaged and involved in the process. And they came to the table with lots of good ideas, and you'll see a lot of those incorporated within this master plan. Sustainability. Obviously, a lot of projects are geared towards sustainability or do result in that. Taxiway Hotel will reduce taxi times and delays, reduce fuel burns. The maintenance yard will reduce fuel usage for the maintenance workers to the airfield. Installing the new laboratory dump station close to the terminal, again, reducing fuel usage. So a lot of things were all geared toward efficiency, which also helped with sustainability issues. Environmental preservation, again, wanting to be assessing the future development as it relates to Goleta Slough in particular and other sensitive habitats. With the exception of the Taxiway Hotel extension, all the development in the plan will occur outside of the Goleta Slough. Only hotel has that particular issue to deal with, and which will be follow-on work, environmental work, which will address that. Cultural resource protection, preserve and enhance archaeological and historic resources. One of the things we did in this plan is, at the very onset, we did quite an extensive environmental inventory, and that was used throughout this study as we looked at the alternatives to make sure that we were minimizing the effects of the development items on these resources. And so once we've identified a lot of the resources that, if in fact they may be impacted by the development, mitigation plans will be developed through the environmental process to make sure that those are addressed. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you for that really great comprehensive summary of really over a year and a half's worth of work, and just thousands and thousands of hours of really excellent work by your staff and the whole committee and all the groups involved. I'm sure there's questions. Questions? We've done such a great job. I guess.
It's a great explanation of what's been happening.
Good. I believe you also received a handout, if I'm not mistaken, which I thought was a pretty good summary of what's been going on, but a lot shorter than my presentation.
And all of the working papers are on the website and will be there for some
The duration.
And certainly lots of great late night reading there. So.
Mr. Chair, I'd
Yes.
just like to mention one thing. Today we met with the Historic Landmarks Commission to discuss the whole plan, but specifically the historic buildings that are on the terminal and their concerns, and so that we make sure that they get addressed in future meetings and environmental work that will be done. And they are concerned about the preservation of the World War II buildings, so more of that to come. We will be making a presentation also to Planning Commission, the Goleta City Council, as well as our own City Council, so to bring everybody kind of up to speed where we are at this point.
Are those meetings scheduled yet?
Well, we were trying to schedule it till our City Council canceled, well, I guess in Goleta too, there's summer break, so we're going to reschedule that. Planning Commission is
Planning Commission is scheduled for August 8th.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to come out and join us again.
Absolutely.
Thank you for all the tremendous effort that went into it.
Now, we've got a little ways to go yet, but thank you for all the help and support, certainly from the committee and everyone else's effort.
All right. And I think that takes us to item 9, Airport Visitor Information Center.
Ms. Johns will speak to that.
Come before then.
Thank you. Over the past couple of months, we've discussed the partnership between the airport and both the Goleta Chamber and the Santa Barbara Chamber to develop a visitor information center in the new airline terminal. The airport, what you have before you tonight is the operating agreement between the airport and the Santa Barbara Chamber, because they're going to take the lead on the visitor volunteers, getting the volunteers for the visitor center. They will be responsible for recruiting, for training, supervising, scheduling, actually keeping it, that's okay, Mabel.
It looks really nice, though.
Keeping it operational, and so that we can meet and greet our visitors to the terminal and provide information on events, hotels, restaurants, whatever might be going on in the Central Valley and central region of our area. The airport is, I was trying to show, provided the furniture, the counter. We will also move the maps and the brochures that we have down by the rent-a-car area, incorporate that at the visitor center, and eventually have a hotel motel courtesy board or a ground transportation. It's more like a TV. It's an interactive screen for those services. That's on the way. That's not up just yet. Based on the needs for having a paid coordinator, we will be, as this agreement outlines for you, we will be providing funding to the Santa Barbara Chamber of Commerce, about $6,800 for the volunteer coordinator, another $3,000 just to the Chamber for management oversight of the whole program, and then also have about $3,500 available for printed materials as they run out so that we can restock for that. So I would recommend your consideration for approval of the operating permit.
Question. Where is this located in the terminal?
It is located, if you come down
verbal picture.
It's in the bag claim area, just as you come in past the elevator, and it's just right there. Before you get to the rent-a-cars, it's just right in that little niche that we have. Well identified. It'll have signage. And in fact, that's something we are doing right now, is improving signage in the terminal with flag signs for the rent-a-cars. So if you're looking down the row, you can see the various rent-a-cars. Same thing in the terminal and ticketing. All of the airlines have their backboards, but you can't see everybody if you're just glancing down that way. So we're increasing flag signs in the ticketing area as well.
Okay, it has been requested that we recommend approval for the airport director to execute an operating agreement with the Santa Barbara Region Chamber of Commerce for a visitor information center for a total reimbursement of $13,364.
Motion we approve it.
Second.
Thing. All in favor of approving the recommendation?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the recommendation to approve is approved. All right, the director's report.
Okay. Well, I want to point out a few things on my report, and then, as usual, if there's something I don't mention on the report that you'd like me to talk about, I'd be happy to. Our passenger count looks a little bit different as it got passed out tonight. Our count for June is down 8% over June of last year, and then year-to-date, on a calendar basis, we're down 2%. But you also got the fiscal year report, and fiscal year 13, which just ended June 30th, over fiscal year 12, we're up 1%. So it depends on what kind of view you want to, optimistic or pessimistic. We were wondering why the big decrease in this June over the previous year, and we're still kind of scratching our heads, but we have about 350 less seats in this June than we did the previous June, as well as we had 33 flight cancellations this June compared to 11 the previous June. So I'm not sure exactly how to mush those numbers all around, but that impacted it somewhat. I don't have any other kind of explanation handy on my tip of my tongue. But in the reduction in passengers, we can also see in our concessions. The restaurant saw a decrease in June, as well as the gift shop. So you can really see how closely the concessions are tied to the passenger count. Air service, a good thing. Portland, Alaska has announced that they will operate Portland year-round. So that is really, really good news. We're very, very pleased and hope the community responds by flying to Portland a lot, filling those seats. The terminal arts program, the sculpture is going through its final reviews, and so it will come to Airport Commission in August, and then proceed to ABR and the Visual Arts in Public Places Committee, as well as it'll have to go to Planning Commission for a coastal development permit. So there's still a little bit to go. In October, we'll be having our full-scale emergency exercise, which we're required to do by FAA regulation every 3 years. On the in-between years, we do tabletops and other kinds of emergency planning, but this is the full-scale get out in the field and try and simulate as a real response as possible. And as you can imagine, with the crash at San Francisco Airport, you could hopefully see how, planning for that type of event, and knock on plastic that it won't ever happen here, but those things do happen. So we'll let you know, we'll keep you informed, because I know many times commissioners and council likes to come out and watch the exercise. So that's all I was going to point out on the director's report. If you have anything else, I'd be happy to.
I was just curious, I don't recall the number, but the cancellations, is that something that does in fact get tracked? The airlines report that?
Yes.
Do they break it down as to the purpose, weather, equipment?
No, not really. And we try as we go through the month, if there's something really significant that happens, either weather or some reason that affects the flight schedule, we try and track that and then write it on the passenger count so we can remember it in the future. But
okay, thank
yeah.
you. Was the number for this month unusually?
It was in June of 2012. There were 11 cancellations. there were 33, and excuse me, about 85% of those were United, and I suspect they were United to San Francisco.
They were.
Right.
So.
And that's about 700 seats.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just a clarification or question on the public arts program, item 4. It says that the agreement between the city and the foundation for the transfer and title of interest in the glass sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
Can you clarify what interests were?
When
understanding that
we discussed that
yeah.
at commission, the agreement is so that when the sculpture can be put in place on airport property, and then we take it over. So it's like the art that was put in the terminal, not the long-term loan art, but the medallion on the floor. We did an agreement with the artist that transferred the right to that art to us.
This was the item that came before us.
No,
I think
right?
about 2 sessions.
There were 2 aspects of it. It was the ownership interest and the maintenance aspect of it.
Right.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for being here.
Thank
we
you.
are adjourned.